the Diocese of Salina. The story of the faith in this region began with the labors of zealous missionaries, was nurtured by holy bishops, priests, and nuns, and carries on today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop Gerald Lee Vincke.
And I tell people this, I've been to so many great football games and basketball games, the popes and everything too. But the most exciting thing is when people come to the faith to encounter Jesus. That's what gets me pumped up more than anything.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. Lying in the Smoky Hills region of the Great Plains, 6 miles southwest of the confluence of the Saline and Smoky Hill rivers, is the city of Salina, sea city of the Diocese of Salina.
The state of Kansas, with its Wild West past, cattle ranches, wheat fields, and sweeping prairies, is a place rich in history and in culture. When gold was discovered in the Rocky Mountains in 1856 in what was called the Pikes Peak Gold Rush. 2 years later, in 1858, the town of Salina was founded along the Smoky Hill Trail, which was an ancient Native American path hugging the Smoky Hill River. This path provided miners and settlers the shortest and fastest route west across the area of Kansas. In subsequent years, Salina quickly became an important trading post for American Indian tribes, western-bound immigrants, and treasure-seeking prospectors. The Catholic population in this area was very small at first, but by the late 1800s, it was large enough to become a diocese of its own.
The Diocese of Salina was established in 1887 as the Diocese of Concordia, and the see was not transferred to Salina until 1944. Over its history, the diocese has experienced the ups and downs of the agricultural economy, seeing its own fortunes rise and fall in bountiful years and in lean ones. The first bishop of the Diocese of Concordia, Richard Scannell, was an immigrant of Ireland. During the early years of the diocese, the region was hit by both a drought and an invasion of locust, which drove many from the region and thinned out the Catholic population.
The first years of that diocese were very challenging for Bishop Scannell. He's struggling to recruit priests, but yet he has this vision of how he'd like to see the diocese grow. There are only 5 priests in the diocese. 5. Bishop Scannell calls these men together, almost, we're gonna get together and have a little pep talk and try to boost their spirits and boost their morale. And how are we going to, amongst the 6 of us, really take on the diocese? And he divides it into 5 areas, and sort of like the apostles of the early church, he looks at them all and he says, go out there and find Catholics. One of the 5 priests working with Bishop Scannell responds by organizing 24 parish missions spread throughout the diocese. And I think about the commitment that he had and the other priests had in the face of extraordinary challenging times, not just physically, but also in terms of finding souls.
When the first bishop of the Diocese of Concordia was appointed as Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Omaha, administration of the diocese was turned over to Bishop Hennessy of the Diocese of Wichita. And for a while, there was concern that the Vatican would move to consolidate the two dioceses. But members of the local Catholic community and members of the local clergy made appeals to Rome in an attempt to prevent that from happening. As a result, the Vatican realigned the boundaries between the two dioceses, transferring several counties to the Diocese of Concordia in order to increase its Catholic population and provide a firmer financial footing for the young diocese.
John Cunningham came to the diocese after serving as Bishop of Leavenworth, where he had successfully eliminated the debt from the cathedral building project there. He was known as an ambitious builder, and in the Diocese of Concordia, he was responsible for establishing some 50 parishes and 22 schools, in addition to 3 hospitals.
In many ways, under Bishop Cunningham, we begin to see the diocese begin to grow. Many of the earlier wooden structures, too, that had been built originally, starting to crumble, but it was also destroyed by fires and floods. The new churches that were being planned were built by stone, many of which remain to this day, especially in the more rural communities. We see in these churches evidence of the efforts of Catholics in this period of history in Kansas. These are visible testaments to the faith of these pioneers and the church today.
During this time, we also begin to see religious orders entering the region to help build up the infrastructure of the church. They provide valuable services to the Catholics of the region.
The Sisters of St. Joseph of Rochester, New York, move into Kansas in 1883. A very small group set up a school in the town of Newton, Kansas, and then eventually they moved to Concordia, Kansas, and build a convent and an academy, which becomes the mother house for the new Sisters of St. Joseph community in the area. As the towns grow up around the frontiers, the sisters go to work staffing schools, hospitals, orphanages, even homes for the elderly. The sisters continue this legacy that they began in that they are still serving the communities of Salina, Kansas, and Concordia.
The Capuchin Fathers have a long history and an enduring presence in the diocese. They came to western Kansas in 1878 when they acquired land from the Kansas Pacific Railroad to establish a church in the town of Victoria. They soon outgrew their original structure and made plans for a larger, more magnificent church. They broke ground for the new church, St. Fidelis, in 1808, building one that would accommodate more than 1,000 worshipers at a time when the population of the town was less than 2,000. At the time of its dedication, St. Fidelis was believed to be the largest church west of the Mississippi and was described by the great orator William Jennings Bryan as the Cathedral of the Plains. The construction of St. Fidelis was not simply the work of the Capuchin Fathers. In fact, it was a work of the entire community. Many members of the local parish donated their time and their labor to make the church possible. Much of the local stone that was used was quarried from a site 7 to 8 miles away, and members of the parish volunteered their time in order to transport it back to the church site.
In 1944, the Diocese of Concordia was officially changed to the Diocese of Salina. The name change occurred when the see was moved to the city of Salina. At the time when the request was made by Bishop Francis Augustine Thill, diocesan officials recognized the necessity of the move, given the growth of Salina. Not long after this transferring of the see, Bishop Thill contracted the noted architect Edward Schulte of Cincinnati to design the new cathedral church, Sacred Heart. The cornerstone was laid on June 4th, 1951, and it was dedicated on June 6th, 1953.
It is almost immediately identifiable as the work of Schulte, the architect. It's modern, but it's really very classical too. So this is sort of a search for an American idiom of ecclesiastical style in the 20th century. So what we don't have is a European cathedral picked up and dropped in the plains. What we have is really these seeds of the traditional ecclesiastical buildings from Europe planted in American soil. And what grows up is this most spectacular and unique site-specific architecture. So this is modern, but it's very much rooted in tradition. This is an imposing building. When you come closer, there's a bas-relief of a procession, as well as a bas-relief of the crucified Christ on the exterior. So the grain elevator style of this tower calls to mind both the expulsion from the garden and the "in toil you will eat of it all the days of your life," as well as the promise of heavenly rest.
I love the simplicity of it all. We're a rural diocese, and we have some silos outside to make it look like a farming territory. People walk in, and actually I had so many visitors from Michigan who just like, oh, this is really beautiful in a very unique way.
The interior has mosaicked, glittering walls in the sanctuary. Mosaics are made by taking individual tessera, the little tiny tiles, and placing them each at a slightly different angle. So they catch the light, and the light really dances. And so there's almost a flame-like quality that relates to the Sacred Heart. And so again, that play on light and Christ as the light of the world. It also marks this area as the holiest of holies. It's the most significant area because that's where the sacrifice of the Mass takes place. It's also where the cathedra is. This is the seat of the bishop, who is the head of the see of the diocese, who traces his authority all the way back to St. Peter.
For the people of Salina, their living connection to the ministry of Peter is the bishop. And in each cathedral, the chair or cathedra represents his authority as a successor of the apostles.
I grew up in mid-Michigan. It's a little town, Maple Grove, it's really the town, and it's between Flint and Saginaw. And I grew up on a small farm with cows and chickens and pigs, but also 9 brothers and sisters. I was the 9th of 10. I'm the youngest of 7 boys. There's 15 years that separate us all, so my mom had 10 children within 15 years. It was great because we had property and we worked hard, of course, because we all had chores to do, chickens, and my brothers had a lot of cows to milk and feed, but we also farmed soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, corn, and so we were always kept pretty busy. But we had a lot of fun too, because there was always time we had our own baseball team pretty much, and we'd play baseball and basketball and football on a regular basis together. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about forgiveness too. And obviously when you have 6 brothers, 3 sisters, you're fighting sometimes. I remember when I was 12 years old, I was one of the youngest boy, and my older brothers were doing chores outside, and I was stuck doing the dishes with my sisters. I'm a big sports fan, and I went to leave doing the dishes to go watch the sports, and my mom ordered me back in the kitchen, and I snapped back at her. That was a mistake, because my dad was sitting there, and he ordered me back in the kitchen. I snapped back at him, and he wasn't gonna tolerate that, so he was gonna spank me, and I wasn't gonna let him. So he's trying to spank me, and we're on the ground wrestling. And finally, I got away from my dad, and I was very happy because I didn't let him spank me, right? Went out and shot hoops. The next thing you know, there's this big commotion in the house because my father was having a heart attack. He was in the hospital for a whole week. And yet, when he came home, I was so ashamed because I was too ashamed to go visit him in the hospital because I was responsible for this. And yet, when he came home, he just put his arm around me and said, "I forgive you. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about a thing." So I've always felt the Father's love in that too.
Vincke's call to the priesthood came slowly but persistently, prompted by the questions of other priests whom he respected.
I was a senior in high school, and I had a girlfriend, and I walked out of church, and the priest was greeting everyone, and we walked by him. He just stops right in front of us and says, "Have you ever thought about being a priest?" To me. And I looked at him, I looked at my girlfriend, I said, "Nope, I haven't. I really didn't think about being a priest, but it was that bug. I think it put a bug in my ear. And then when I went to college, got involved with journalism, and I worked for the student newspaper. I had interviewed a local parish priest at Fair State. Everybody loved Father Joe. I asked him a question, and he just gazed at me, just looked at me, and he said, "Have you ever thought about being a priest?" So that was the second time that somebody had thought about me being a priest. But then the big thing for me was working for the Cardinals, because I did want to work in sports. And I thought, wow, I'm meeting all these famous players and all these great superstars. And, you know, I just felt like the Lord was calling me to something different. And it was just a feeling in your heart that I think God might be calling me to be a priest. I started off in the seminary in Mount St. Mary's in Cincinnati. I was there for a couple of years. Enjoyed it there very much. Then I finished 1 year at Mount St. Mary's, and then I transferred to Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. And I really enjoyed it there too. In fact, my classmates, we get together. I got ordained in 1999, and every month since we got ordained, we've gotten together. Obviously couldn't make it to every meeting. So they're a great group of guys.
During his first year of priesthood, his father became very ill with cancer, leading Father Vincke to spend the last days of his life by his bedside.
So he was 80 years old, so he had a beautiful life, but he planted his corn in the fields, and then like within a few days later, he was diagnosed with liver cancer. I have no regrets. I really did not have any regrets with my dad. I mean, he knew that I loved him, and I knew that he loved me too. I went on a retreat, and it was, you know, how you go on a retreat, you're praying with scripture and so on, and I was just very frustrated. And I told my director, I said, "Gosh, it just feels like I'm wrestling with God." And he goes, "Why don't you pray with that a little bit?" And nothing came, and finally I said, "You know, the only thing I can think of is when I wrestle with my father." And I said, "But we became very close." And I said, the last week of his life, I was the one who took care of him. I was there by his bedside, taking care of him the whole week. And my directors looked at me and said, "Do you realize how good God is?" And I kind of, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Remember that week where you were so ashamed? You wouldn't visit him, or you're too ashamed. And yet the Lord allowed you to take care of your dad the last week of his life." And it was really beautiful. It's so true. God redeems everything, even our mistakes and our faults and failings, even the guilt and shame that we have.
After years of ministry as the director of a retreat house, director of seminariums, vocation director, and spiritual director at the North American College in Rome, Father Vincke was named the next bishop of the Diocese of Salina in June of 2018.
I was at the Institute for Priestly Formation, IPF, at Creighton. It was the Feast of Corpus Christi, June 3rd. I noticed there was a call from Washington, D.C., but I didn't think of anything of it. And then later in the evening, Archbishop Christophe Pierre called. And the first thing he said, well, he goes, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "No, should I?" He goes, "Yeah, you probably should." He said, "Well, the Holy Father's chosen you to be the Bishop of Salina." And I didn't even understand him at first. I thought he said Cheyenne. I go, Cheyenne? He goes, no, Salina, Kansas. People were very receptive. You have to do this interview and do all these things, and then you got to get new vestments and all these things. You got to pick a coat of arms, and I didn't know where to go from there. And picking out the motto, every bishop has to pick out a motto. I was praying one time, and it just came to me, rich in mercy. When I got ordained on August 22nd, just a special day. I picked August 22nd because it was a Marian day. The evening prayer the night before felt the Holy Spirit in a beautiful way, and even with the ordination, I loved it. It was a beautiful day.
In the years since becoming bishop, Bishop Vincke has worked hard to live out his motto, rich in mercy, by caring for his people as a pastor and spreading the faith as an apostle.
To me, it's the mission of the church is to bring people to the church. It's beautiful. That's what warms my heart more than anything. And I tell people this, I've been to so many great football games and basketball games, last-second shots, and that's exciting. I mean, I've met, the popes and everything too, a couple popes, Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, great. But the most exciting thing is when people come to the faith. Even for the rite of election this year, 2 men that I met were atheists, and years past. And when they told their story to me, you just can't help, but that's what really excites me more than anything, because that's what I want them, is to encounter the living God, right? To encounter Jesus. That's what gets me pumped up more than anything.